Ambassador Veltar stood in the observation deck of what had once been the most feared Drakari battleship in the galaxy, and watched human engineers installing new weapon systems along its hull. 6 months had passed since first contact, and the galaxy had learned things about humanity that no one could have predicted from their peaceful broadcasts and cultural transmissions. The war against the Drakari Empire had lasted exactly 4 weeks. It had not been a war in any traditional sense, but rather a systematic dismantling of everything the Drakari had built over 3 centuries of conquest. Human fleets had appeared at every major Drakari world simultaneously, and demanded immediate surrender of all military forces. When the aliens refused, the humans had proceeded to demonstrate why refusal was not a viable option. Admiral Morrison walked up beside Veltar, and both beings watched the activity outside in comfortable silence. The human commander had changed over the past months and now carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had solved a problem that had seemed impossible to everyone else. His dark eyes still held the same dangerous intelligence, but there was something softer there too, as if victory had allowed him to remember that he was fighting to protect rather than simply to destroy. The Galactic Council had tried to protest the humans' methods and suggest that there might be more diplomatic solutions to the Drakari problem. Veltar himself had written several reports expressing concern about humanity's approach to conflict resolution and questioning whether such aggressive tactics were necessary. Those reports now seemed foolish and naive in hindsight. Dr. Patricia Lane joined them at the observation window with a datapad full of intelligence reports that her teams had recovered from captured Drakari facilities. The information painted a picture of an empire built on systematic cruelty, with slave labor camps and genetic experimentation programs and planned genocides that would have eliminated entire species. The Drakari had not been potential partners for negotiation, but rather monsters that needed to be stopped before they could spread their poison to more innocent worlds. The humans had understood this from the beginning, while the Council had still been hoping for peaceful solutions that could never have existed. Patricia's research teams had found evidence that the Drakari considered other species to be nothing more than resources to be consumed, and that their long-term plans involved the complete subjugation of every intelligent race in the galaxy. The Council's diplomatic overtures had been seen as evidence of weakness, rather than attempts at reasonable compromise. Captain Elena Rodriguez materialized beside them as if she had stepped out of the shadows, and Veltar still found himself startled by how quietly the human Marines could move when they wanted to. Elena carried herself with the easy confidence of a predator that knew it was at the top of the food chain, and her presence made even friendly conversations feel like they were taking place in the middle of a battlefield. The captain had spent the past month establishing human military bases on former Drakari worlds and helping liberated populations rebuild their societies. Her Marines had become legends among the freed slaves who told stories of humans who fought like demons and showed mercy like angels. Elena's soldiers were equally capable of storming an enemy fortress or helping construct schools for alien children, and the contrast still amazed Veltar. The human approach to warfare was unlike anything the Council had ever encountered, because it was not really about warfare at all, but rather about problem-solving on a massive scale. When the humans looked at the Drakari Empire, they did not see a military challenge, but rather a disease that needed to be eliminated from the galactic body. Their tactics were designed not just to win battles, but to ensure that the defeated enemy could never rise again to threaten innocent beings. Admiral Morrison turned to Veltar and spoke in the careful diplomatic tone that he used when discussing sensitive subjects. The human commander had learned to moderate his natural directness when talking to alien officials, but his meaning was always clear beneath the polite words. He wanted to know if the Council was prepared to accept humanity as a full member of their alliance, and whether they understood what such membership would entail. Veltar considered his response carefully because he knew that his words would help determine the future relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy. The Council had gotten exactly what they asked for when they sent their message to Earth, but the help had come in a form that challenged everything they thought they knew about peace and civilization and the proper way to resolve conflicts between intelligent species. The truth was that humans terrified most council members even as they were grateful for the protection that Earth's military forces provided. These beings could create beautiful art and compose moving music and write poetry that brought tears to alien eyes, but they could also wage war with the efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They were capable of both great kindness and terrible violence, sometimes within the same conversation. Dr. Lane showed them her latest analysis of human psychology and explained how Earth species had evolved the ability to switch between different modes of behavior depending on the situation they faced. Humans could be gentle teachers or ruthless soldiers or brilliant scientists or gifted artists, and they could transition between these roles without any apparent internal conflict. This flexibility made them incredibly valuable allies, but also potentially dangerous enemies. The Council had voted unanimously to accept humanity as a full member of their alliance with all the rights and responsibilities that such membership entailed. But Veltar knew that the real decision had been made by the humans themselves when they chose to use their power to protect rather than to conquer. Earth could have easily taken control of the Council worlds and established their own empire, but instead, they had chosen to become guardians of a peace that others had built. Admiral Morrison explained humanity's long-term plans for galactic security, and Veltar felt both relief and concern as he listened to the details. The humans intended to establish permanent bases throughout Council space and maintain fleets capable of responding to any threat within days rather than months. They would train alien military forces and share defensive technologies and create intelligence networks that could detect problems before they became crises. The galaxy would be safer than it had ever been, but it would also be under the protection of a species that viewed violence as just another tool to be used when diplomacy failed. Humans had proven that they could be trusted with such power, but the knowledge that Earth possessed weapons capable of destroying entire star systems was something that would take time for other species to accept. Captain Rodriguez spoke up with the practical concerns of someone who would be implementing these security arrangements, and her words reminded everyone that peace was not a natural state, but rather something that had to be actively maintained. The humans understood this in ways that peaceful species could not, and they were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the civilization that the Council had built together. As Veltar watched the stars outside the observation window, he reflected on how much everything had changed since that desperate message was sent to Earth. The Council had called to the stars asking for help against monsters, and the universe had answered by sending them humanity. The humans were indeed monsters in their own way, but they were monsters who chose to use their terrible gifts in service of something greater than themselves. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed. Captain Elena Rodriguez moved through the corridors of the captured Drakari flagship, with her Marines spread out in perfect formation behind her. The alien ship was massive, and built like a fortress with thick armor plating and defensive positions at every intersection. The walls were black metal covered in symbols that looked like they had been carved by claws, and the air carried a scent that reminded Elena of burning sulfur and old blood. The Drakari themselves were impressive specimens that stood over 8 feet tall with natural armor plating covering their reptilian bodies. Their arms ended in claws that could cut through steel, and their mouths were filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. These aliens had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, and they carried that brutal heritage in every movement and gesture. They had never encountered anything like humanity's Marines. Elena's first glimpse of the enemy came when a squad of Drakari warriors charged around a corner with weapons raised and murder in their eyes. They moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, and their roars echoed through the ship's corridors like the voices of ancient dragons. Each alien was a perfect killing machine that could have torn apart a dozen ordinary humans without breaking into a sweat. Sergeant Danny Murphy was the first to open fire, and his assault rifle spoke with the voice of human engineering at its most lethal. The bullets were designed to penetrate armor, and the rate of fire was calculated to overwhelm any target before it could respond. The charging Drakari ran straight into a wall of projectiles that turned their natural armor into useless decoration and their superior strength into a meaningless advantage. The aliens died confused, and probably wondering why their physical superiority had not been enough to save them. Elena's Marines moved through the ship like a disease that infected everything it touched. Human tactics were not about individual strength or honor duels, or any of the primitive concepts that governed warfare among less advanced species. Human warfare was about overwhelming firepower delivered with surgical precision by teams that had trained together until they could anticipate each other's movements without conscious thought. When the Drakari tried to set up defensive positions, the Marines used grenades to clear them out. When the aliens attempted to use their superior numbers, the humans fell back to prepared positions and turned every corridor into a killing field. When the enemy tried to coordinate their defense, the Marines cut their communication lines and left them fighting blind against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Corporal Amy Johnson led her fire team through the ship's engineering section while Elena's main force pushed toward the bridge. Amy was small even by human standards, but she carried enough firepower to level a city block, and her team moved with the deadly efficiency of a pack of wolves hunting prey. The Drakari engineers they encountered were not warriors, but they were still dangerous aliens with natural weapons and superior strength. It did not matter because Amy's team did not fight fair. They used motion sensors to track enemy movements, through the walls and thermal imaging to spot aliens hiding in the darkness. When the Drakari tried to ambush them, the Marines were already in position with weapons aimed and fingers on triggers. The aliens found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by beings they had initially dismissed as soft creatures from a peaceful world. The truth was that humans had been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years, and they had learned lessons that peaceful species could not even imagine. Every human weapon was designed by people who understood violence on a level that civilized aliens found disturbing. Every human tactic was tested in conflicts where failure meant death, and survival belonged to those who could adapt fastest to changing conditions. Elena reached the ship's bridge to find the Drakari command crew barricaded behind overturned consoles with their weapons trained on the entrance. The alien captain was a massive specimen with scars covering his armor plating and eyes that burned with the fury of a predator that had never known defeat. He snarled something in his own language that the translation software identified as a challenge to single combat. Elena responded by having her Marines toss flashbang grenades into the room before storming in behind a wall of covering fire. The Drakari captain was still trying to clear his vision when 3 Marines tackled him to the deck and secured his weapons. His honor challenges and warrior traditions meant nothing to soldiers who fought to win, rather than to prove their individual courage. The rest of the ship fell within hours as Elena's Marines methodically cleared each section and secured every potential threat. The aliens who tried to fight were overwhelmed by superior tactics and firepower. Those who tried to hide were found by sensors that could track a heartbeat through solid metal. The few who attempted to surrender were taken prisoner and secured for later interrogation. When Elena reported back to Admiral Morrison that the flagship was secured, she could hear something like satisfaction in his voice. The humans had not. Just won a battle, they had demonstrated that Earth's military forces could take on any enemy in the galaxy and emerge victorious. The Drakari Empire had sent their best warriors and most advanced ships against what they thought was a single human vessel, and the result had been a slaughter that would be remembered for generations. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. The Admiral had bigger plans for dealing with the Drakari threat, and taking one ship was only the first step in a campaign that would teach the galaxy what happened when someone threatened beings under human protection. The Drakari had made the mistake of thinking that humans were like the other peaceful species in the Council, and that error was going to cost them everything they had built. The Marines began preparing the captured ship for the next phase of operations while Elena reviewed intelligence data that her teams had recovered from the alien computers. The information painted a picture of an empire built on conquest and slavery, with dozens of worlds under Drakari control, and millions of beings suffering under their rule. The aliens had been expanding their territory for centuries and considered themselves the ultimate predators in a galaxy full of prey. They were about to learn that there were bigger predators in the universe, and that some of them came from a small blue planet that had been sending music to the stars. Ambassador Veltar felt his heart stop beating for a moment when the human ship appeared on his sensors. The vessel that dropped out of hyperspace was unlike anything in the Council's databases, and certainly nothing like what he had expected from the peaceful species that sent music and art into the void. Where Zephyrian ships were curves and flowing lines that spoke of harmony with the universe, this human craft was all angles and armor plating that suggested its builders understood war intimately. The ship called itself Defiance, and that name alone told Veltar more about humans than all their entertainment broadcasts combined. This was not a vessel built for exploration or trade or cultural exchange. This was a weapon that happened to be capable of traveling between stars, and every line of its design screamed that its creators were not the gentle philosophers the Council had hoped to find. Veltar tried to push down his growing worry as he opened a communication channel to the human vessel. Perhaps the ship's appearance was misleading and the humans inside were still the peaceful beings their transmissions suggested. Maybe they had simply built their ships to look intimidating while keeping their true nature hidden beneath the armor plating. His hopes died quickly when the human admiral responded to his greeting. The voice that came through the communicator was calm and professional, but there was something underneath it that made Veltar's skin crawl. This was the voice of someone who had seen battle and death and had made peace with both. When Admiral Morrison asked if the black ships were the bad guys, his tone suggested that the answer would determine what happened next in very permanent ways. Veltar tried to explain the situation and ask for patience while the Council's diplomats worked on a peaceful solution. The Drakari were aggressive, but surely reasonable beings could find some common ground if they just had enough time to talk. War was such a wasteful thing, and there had to be a better way to resolve conflicts between civilized species. Admiral Morrison's response made it clear that humans had very different ideas about how to handle bullies. He spoke of air superiority and combat operations as if violence was just another tool to be used when appropriate. Before Veltar could protest or try to explain the Council's commitment to peaceful solutions, the human admiral was giving orders to other ships that apparently had been hiding nearby. The space around the Drakari fleet suddenly filled with human warships that had been cloaked and waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Veltar counted 30 vessels of various sizes, all bristling with weapons, and moving with the coordinated precision of a military force that had trained together for years. These were not explorer ships or diplomatic vessels. These were the tools of a species that had learned to wage war in the darkness between stars. The human attack began without warning or declaration, or any of the formal protocols that civilized species used when forced into conflict. The ship called Defiance opened fire with weapons that turned the vacuum of space into a light show of pure destruction. Beams of energy and projectile weapons and things that Veltar could not even identify reached across the void to strike the Drakari vessels with devastating precision. The Drakari had been caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of a human fleet. Their ships were powerful and well-armed, but they had been focused on the siege of Zephyria Prime and were not prepared for an attack from behind. The humans showed no interest in fair fights or honor codes or any of the traditions that usually governed warfare between spacefaring species. They simply began systematically destroying every Drakari ship in the system. Veltar watched in horrified fascination as the human vessels moved through space like predators hunting in a pack. They coordinated their attacks with ruthless efficiency and showed tactical awareness that suggested they had been studying Drakari ship designs and weapons capabilities for far longer than should have been possible. Every human shot seemed to find the exact weak point that would cause maximum damage to their targets. The Drakari tried to respond, but their formation was broken, and their communications were being jammed by human electronic warfare systems. Individual ships found themselves facing multiple human attackers, and the results were always the same. The alien vessels that had seemed so threatening just minutes before were being reduced to drifting wreckage with crews that would never see their homeworlds again. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communicator again, and this time there was something that might have been satisfaction in his tone. He was coordinating his fleet's movements and calling out targets with the casual efficiency of someone directing a training exercise, rather than a real battle. The humans were not struggling or desperate or fighting for their lives. They were simply doing a job that needed to be done. The largest Drakari ship tried to break away from the battle and escape to hyperspace, but 3 human destroyers intercepted it before its engines could spin up. The enemy vessel was disabled with surgical precision and left drifting helpless, while human boarding parties prepared to take it intact. Veltar realized that the humans were not just winning this battle, They were capturing ships and prisoners for later interrogation. Within 2 hours of their arrival, the human fleet had completely destroyed or captured every Drakari vessel in the system. The siege that had lasted for weeks was over, and the skies above Zephyria Prime were clear except for the dark shapes of human warships maintaining patrol patterns. The aliens who had threatened to burn down everything the Council had built were now either dead or prisoners of a species that the Council had invited to join their peaceful alliance. Veltar tried to process what he had just witnessed while his communications staff attempted to re-establish contact with the human admiral. The beings the Council had hoped would be gentle partners in diplomacy had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in their databases. The humans had not just saved Zephyria Prime. They had done it with a level of tactical sophistication that suggested warfare was something they understood better than most species understood breathing. When Admiral Morrison finally responded to their calls, his voice carried an undertone that made Veltar's blood run cold. These humans were offering to help the Council defend their other worlds from Drakari attacks, and their tone suggested that such help would be very thorough and very permanent. The ambassador began to realize that the Council had called to the stars asking for help against monsters, and the universe had answered by sending them different monsters. The question was whether these new monsters could be controlled, or if the Council had simply traded one form of destruction for another. Ambassador Veltar stood in the communication room of the Zephyrian High Command building and looked at the massive screen in front of him. His forearms shook as he prepared to send the most important message in the history of his people. Trident. Blue lights from the quantum transmitter cast strange shadows on his pale skin and made his large eyes look even bigger than usual. For 300 years, the Galactic Council had been a place of peace. 12 different alien species had come together to share knowledge and trade goods across the stars. They had built beautiful cities on dozens of worlds and created art that could make beings cry with joy. War was something they read about in old history books. Violence was a word that children learned but never truly understood. But now everything was changing, and Veltar could feel the fear growing in his chest like a cold stone. The Drakari Empire had arrived at their borders 6 months ago, and nothing had been the same since. These new aliens were different from anyone the Council had ever met. They did not want to trade or share stories or create beautiful things together. They wanted to take and destroy and consume everything in their path like some terrible disease. The Drakari ships were black as the space between stars and covered in weapons that could turn entire cities into ash in seconds. When they spoke to the Council, they used words like conquest and submission and total victory. They gave the peaceful alliance one choice: surrender everything or watch it all burn. The Council had tried to negotiate, but the Drakari laughed at their offers of trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. Veltar walked to the transmitter controls and began entering the coordinates for a small blue planet that his science teams had been watching for over a century. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, and it orbited a yellow star in a quiet part of the galaxy. The beings who lived there called themselves humans, and they had been sending radio signals into space for many decades. Most of these signals were entertainment programs and news broadcasts and music that suggested a species that valued peace and cooperation. The human broadcasts showed people working together to solve problems and create art and explore their world. They had programs about helping animals and protecting their environment and taking care of children. Their music spoke of love and hope and dreams of touching the stars. Their movies often showed heroes who chose to save others instead of saving themselves. Everything the Council had learned about humans suggested they were exactly the kind of species that would fit perfectly into their peaceful alliance. But Veltar also knew that humans had been fighting wars on their planet for thousands of years. Their history was full of conflicts and battles and struggles for survival. This worried some members of the Council who thought that any species with such a violent past might not be suitable for membership. However, their recent broadcasts suggested they had moved beyond such primitive behaviors and were ready to join the civilized galaxy. The truth was that the Council was desperate and running out of options. The Drakari fleet grew larger every day, and their demands became more threatening with each passing week. The Council's own military forces were small and designed mostly for keeping peace between member worlds. They had never been built to fight a real war against an enemy that wanted to destroy everything they had built. Veltar began recording his message and tried to keep his voice steady, despite the fear that made his hearts beat too fast. He knew that this transmission might be the last hope for billions of innocent beings across the Council worlds. If the humans refused to help, or if they were not as advanced as the broadcast suggested, then the Drakari would sweep across the galaxy like a storm of fire and death. The message was carefully written by the Council's best diplomats and scientists. It explained who they were and what they had built together over the centuries. It described the beauty of their worlds and the knowledge they had gathered from across the stars. It spoke of art and music and literature that had been created by dozens of different species working in harmony. The message painted a picture of everything that would be lost if the Drakari were allowed to continue their conquest. Then the message explained the threat they faced and asked for help from the humans. It did not ask for soldiers or weapons, or warships. Instead, it asked for allies who understood the value of cooperation and peace. The Council believed that humans, with their history of overcoming differences and working together, would be perfect partners in finding a diplomatic solution to the Drakari problem. Veltar finished recording and sent the message racing across the void toward the small blue planet. The transmission would take months to reach Earth, and months more for any reply to return. He could only hope that the humans would understand the urgency of the situation and respond quickly with offers of friendship and support. As he watched the message disappear into the darkness of space, Veltar allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have humans as part of the Council. He pictured their delegates walking through the crystal halls of Zephyria Prime and sharing their knowledge with beings from across the galaxy. He imagined human artists working with Zephyrian musicians to create new forms of beauty that neither species could achieve alone. The ambassador had no way of knowing that his message would indeed reach Earth, and that the humans would respond much faster than anyone expected. He also had no way of knowing that the response would be very different from what he hoped to receive. The humans were coming, but they were bringing something with them that would change everything the Council thought they knew about peace and war and survival. In the months that followed, Veltar would learn that sometimes the greatest mercy is delivered by the most terrible weapons, and that peace is often won by those who understand violence better than anyone else. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars stretch into lines as his ship dropped out of hyperspace. The massive warship shuddered slightly as its engines adjusted to normal space, and Jake felt the familiar weight of gravity return to his body. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with the quiet efficiency that came from months of training and preparation. The alien message had reached Earth 3 months ago, and everything had changed overnight. The radio telescopes at the Deep Space Communication Center had detected the transmission, and within hours every government on the planet was involved in heated discussions about how to respond. The message itself was peaceful enough, but Jake and his fellow military commanders could read between the lines and see what the aliens were really saying. Someone was threatening them and they needed help. The United Earth Defense Council had spent 2 weeks arguing about the proper response. The diplomats wanted to send a small peaceful delegation with scientists and cultural experts who could learn about alien civilizations and establish friendly relations. The scientists wanted to send research vessels filled with equipment to study alien technology and biology. The politicians wanted to send trade representatives who could negotiate profitable deals for Earth corporations. Jake and the other military leaders had different ideas. They pointed out that the aliens specifically mentioned a threat, and that peaceful species under attack needed protection, not poetry readings. The message described an aggressive enemy that refused diplomatic solutions and seemed intent on conquest. In Jake's experience, that kind of enemy only understood one language, and it was not spoken with words. The final decision was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but gave everyone something they wanted. Earth would send multiple ships, including diplomatic vessels and research platforms, but the mission would be led by the military, and the largest ship in the fleet would be a fully armed battlecruiser. Jake's ship, the Defiance, was chosen to lead the expedition because it represented the best of human engineering and firepower. The Defiance was beautiful in the way that all truly dangerous things were beautiful. Its hull was dark gray metal studded with weapon ports and sensor arrays that could track a missile from 1,000 miles away. The ship stretched nearly a mile from bow to stern and carried enough firepower to level a small city. Its crew of 800 included some of the best soldiers and officers that Earth had ever produced. Jake walked over to the tactical station where Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks was studying the sensor displays. Lisa had been his navigation officer for 5 years, and he trusted her judgment completely. She had a gift for reading sensor data that bordered on supernatural and could spot threats before they appeared on anyone else's screens. Lisa looked up as Jake approached, and her expression was grim. The sensor readings showed a system in chaos with energy signatures that could only mean one thing. Someone was fighting a war in the space around the alien homeworld, and from the looks of things, it was not going well for the good guys. The main screen lit up with a tactical display that showed the Zephyrian system in detail. The planet itself was a blue and green world that reminded Jake of Earth but smaller, and with 3 moons instead of 1. Around the planet were dozens of ships engaged in what could only be described as a massacre. The defending vessels were elegant and graceful with flowing lines that suggested they were built for exploration and trade rather than war. The attacking ships were something else entirely. They were black angular monsters that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood violence on a fundamental level. These vessels bristled with weapons and armor plating and moved through space like predators hunting prey. Jake had seen enough battles to know that the defenders were losing badly and would not last much longer without help. He activated the ship's communication system and opened a channel to the rest of the human fleet. 30 other vessels had made the journey from Earth, including destroyers and frigates and support ships carrying marines and medical supplies. The entire fleet had been traveling under stealth protocols, but now it was time to reveal themselves and see what kind of situation they were walking into. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the Marine contingent aboard the troopship Vengeance, and she responded immediately to Jake's call. Elena was one of the toughest soldiers Jake had ever met, and her Marines were known throughout the Earth military as the kind of people you wanted on your side when things went bad. If there was going to be fighting, then Elena and her troops would be ready for it. Dr. Patricia Lane was aboard the research vessel Discovery, and she was monitoring all alien communications that the fleet could intercept. Patricia had spent her entire career studying xenobiology and alien languages, and she was already beginning to understand the basic structure of the alien transmissions. Her job was to make sure that the humans did not accidentally start a war through some cultural misunderstanding. Jake opened a channel to the Zephyrian defenders and waited for a response. When it came, the voice was musical and strange, but the translation software that Patricia had programmed was already beginning to make sense of the alien words. The being who spoke identified himself as Ambassador Veltar, and he sounded both relieved and worried to hear from the humans. The ambassador explained that the attacking ships belonged to something called the Drakari Empire, and that they had been besieging the planet for weeks. He thanked the humans for coming, but warned them that a single ship would not be able to stand against the entire Drakari fleet. He suggested that perhaps they could arrange some kind of negotiations to end the conflict peacefully. Jake listened to the translation and felt a familiar cold anger building in his chest. He had heard similar speeches before from people who were used to talking their way out of problems, and who did not understand that some enemies could not be reasoned with. The Drakari ships were not here to negotiate, and they would not be impressed by diplomatic protests or appeals to their better nature. It was time to show the galaxy what humans brought to a fight.